Hello and welcome. We're just slowly waiting for a couple of people to connect. And welcome to all those who are now in our webinar room. Very excited to see people are being connected and coming to this Learning Lab room. We've deliberately chosen a bright yellowish orange background to brighten up your day because in Melbourne, it's very wet and rainy and cold. And that's not often the weather that I like. And hopefully this bright backgrounds work for everyone, and welcome to this webinar. It's 11 a.m. so I might just kick us off and welcome everyone to this first learning lab of this year, organized by Capire Consulting Group. I first want to kick us off by acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which the Capire team today is zooming in from. I would like to acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. And I believe that some of you might be zooming up in from different places and countries, so I do acknowledge those elders from your country as well. So today it's about learning about engagement. And who are we learning this from? Today, I really want to be very privileged to hear from the co-founder of Capire Consulting Group, Amy Hubbard. Today, it's really about sharing our practice in this field we're hitting 15 years this year. So a lot of knowledge we want to share with all of you and also hear from you about your practice and how does that apply to your day-to-day work. And there'll be lots of opportunities for you to contribute through Mentimeter. So get your phone ready if you have a smartphone that you can scan and interact online. And also you can use the webinar Q&A box to ask any questions anytime. So again, just to reiterate, introduce myself properly. I'm Tiffany Tang from Capire Consulting Group, and I'm a senior consultant here. Also previously, I'm from Hong Kong and moved to Melbourne 4 years ago. So there's lots of cultural differences here that I would love to hear from people. If you're zooming in from different parts of the world, that would be nice to hear from you too. So before we kickstart, we do want to actually know who is in this room. And how we're doing this is through this interactive tool called Mentimeter. If you're in the engagement practice during the lockdown times, you probably is very familiar with this tool, but if not, we can run this past you step by step. First of all, take out your phone if you have a scan QR code function and scan the QR code on the screen. Otherwise, you can also type in your web browser, menti.com, so that's spelled M-E-N-T-I, and type in a code. So the code is on the screen right now, 8-digit code up there. So I'm seeing some hearts. So you will be able to tap on that heart on the screen. That's to indicate that you're currently on that slide. And I'm seeing 16 hearts currently on the screen. Perfect. So you've logged on to Mentimeter. Thank you very much. And there are a couple of questions that are coming up, so stay on that screen. Where are you today is our first question. You can be very creative about this answer. You can tell us which country you're from, which city, which suburb, which cafe, which room, up to you. So Amy, I'm very excited because we are seeing people from Melbourne, Geelong, Footscray, different names of traditional names of the country and the land. Very excited to see that. Thank you very much. Keep going. We would like to know what's your level of interest in community engagement. So there are a couple of choices here. Either you work in the public sector, the private sector, not-for-profit, you work in a tertiary sector, you're a student, you may be an elected representative of your place, or others that doesn't fall into these choices. Got most people working in the public sector. Thanks for your time. We've got people who work in the private sector and not for profit. So hopefully there's a bit more sharing across different sectors happening today. Thank you. How do you describe community engagement in 10 words or less? So give you a bit of time to think about this. Doesn't need to be a poem. Maybe just throw in 10 random words that you can describe about community engagement. We've got the first answer in, an opportunity to empower and work with community. Really love the word empower, and usually that's really difficult to do. Needs lots of planning in place. The right to be involved in decision making, a two-way dialogue and relationship with communities, or giving people their voice in what impacts them. There's a lot of empowerment, getting people involved, connecting with communities. That includes organization, resources, and people. Having the space to consider and experiment and do. Very keen to unpack how can we create that space for our community. This is very good. Necessary. Something that's challenging, giving you diversity of views. Listening and co-design. Lots of big words here in this one. Empower, share, relationship, democracy in action. I hope that everyone had a chance to get your democracy sausages a few weeks ago. And active decision-making, easily confused with consultation and community development. Amy, I think someone's really keen to know what this engagement triangle is going to tell us about. And then last but not the least, planned activity with specific purpose. Purpose is important to involve community. Consideration of a wide range of views and opportunities, collaboration, togetherness. So there are a lot of things on this board, which I think is a good way to introduce Amy. Also in this room, you're only seeing the speaker view, but I'm actually talking to Amy all this time. Any quick observation from Amy on what we've seen on the board?
Quick observation is there are so many different ways to describe what engagement is. That's it.
Thank you. Now I would love to officially welcome Amy to this stage. And today she's going to tell us a bit more about the engagement triangle, which she develops throughout working for so many years in the engagement field and working with different stakeholders and partners. And she came up with this great idea of bringing all these big words together and making sense of it. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Amy and give us a presentation and introduction to this engagement triangle. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Tiff, and thanks for everyone for being here today. I am just going to share my screen because that's what we do. I hope there's some sun shining somewhere out there because it's definitely not shining in Melbourne today. It's probably the most miserable day that it's been for a very long time. So anyway, hopefully the sun is shining out there. I know that we've got some friends in this webinar today, so I want to say hello to our colleagues, our friends, our community engagement network in Melbourne, Victoria and elsewhere, but also I want to say a big hello to the people that we don't know yet, and hello and welcome to this learning lab. This is the first learning lab of the year. We've been a little bit distracted with a few other things called this pandemic thing. And we're looking at having learning labs now on a regular basis online. And yeah, we're going to kick off with this thing called the engagement triangle. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few different things with you. First of all, we'll have a bit of a discussion, even though you'll probably mostly hear from me, about community engagement. We're going to hear about the background to the engagement triangle because it is 10 years old. now. So it's had its birthday recently, and we've changed it because our practice has changed, especially in the last 2 or so years. And then we're going to give you some examples of how you would apply the engagement triangle. I want to emphasize that this is just one tool to understand the purpose of your engagement. And there are other tools out there. Most of you would know the IIP2 spectrum, the core values. There's other things out there that you may use. This is just to add to your suite. It may not be the silver bullet for you. And the engagement triangle has been created based on our experience, Capire's corporate experience of community engagement over the last 15 years. So, first of all, I want to give you some observations about this thing called engagement. So there really is little understanding about what community engagement is and is not outside of our industry. You know, I can have a conversation with most people in my life outside of work, and they have little idea about what I do. Depending on my audience, I say anything from urban policy to social research to communications. So there really is little understanding about what it is that we do. Many organisations hide behind the term engagement. And what I mean is they could have the nastiest project, something that's going to isolate or disenfranchise communities. And they'll say, but we did the engagement. And they somehow think that it's okay. It gives them a social license because they did something called engagement that probably wasn't very engaging for those communities. So many organisations still hide behind this term engagement, which, you know, it is confusing, I suppose. It's confusing for communities, and it's also very disturbing for many practitioners. Often there's misaligned expectations. Misaligned expectations are widespread in our work. Again, because we talk about this thing called engagement, and some organisations, as I said, hide behind this term engagement. And you can have two parties talking about engagement, but they're talking about totally different things. And then most engagement undertaken by public organisation does sit in that inform column of the IIP2 spectrum. So about 7 years ago, we did some audits of local governments in Victoria, and we mapped out all the engagement that they were undertaking with their stakeholders in the communities, and 80% upwards of what they were doing sat in that inform column. But a lot of that work had a lot more depth than just purely inform. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So about 10 years ago, I was reflecting on those same observations that are still very much current to our practice. So I was reflecting on, you know, what is this thing called engagement? And at that time, I went and was working in a local government in Victoria, and we were trying to define what engagement actually was for them. Okay, so what do you do when you're trying to define engagement? Well, you go and do some engagement. So I visited a few different departments within that organisation. So first of all, I met with the corporate communications team. So the corporate communications team, now they managed the website, they managed the communications, they wrote the speeches for the CEO and the mayor. They really were that communications interface with a whole different range of internal and external audiences. And they very much called them audiences. And we were mapping out what they did in this world of engagement. And they felt very strongly that because they own the voice of engagement, so the voice of the organisation, they felt that they owned engagement. We are the voice, you know. This is who we are. We own engagement. They're really, you know, they were very firm on that as well, that they own the voice, so they own engagement. So the next group that I visited was urban planning, that also was sort of co-located in the organisation physically at that time with engineering. So the engineers couldn't help but just kind of pop into the meeting as well. And, you know, we were talking about what they did in terms of engagement. And they said, well, you know, we engage on, you know, most of our projects, always on our strategic projects, and a lot of our statutory projects as well. And there's legislation that has in it, it's enshrined that we need to undertake engagement. And because of that, you know, we've been undertaking engagement with our local communities for a very long time. We've got those relationships established, and they felt that they owned engagement for their organisation. And the third stop was community development. And the community development team, when I reported back what the other groups had said, they were quite outraged. They said, look, you know, we provide all the frontline services, whether it's, you know, youth services or services for people with disabilities, or you know, meals, whatever it may be. They felt, because they were frontline and actually having conversations with people every day and listening to people, listening. This was a bit that they felt were missing from the other two groups, that they owned engagement. So I went away from that process feeling like, wow, so everyone thinks they own engagement, and they're actually talking about really different things. And that's a real risk, not only to their projects and their programs that they're trying to deliver, but it's also a real risk in terms of their relationship with their communities and the trust that they're trying to build with their communities. So, you know, I was thinking, so community engagement, it is about decision making. We know that as practitioners, it's always about decision making. Well, is it always about decision making? But it is involving community in decision making. It's about listening. It's about putting negotiables on the table. And it's about an evidence base to inform better decisions. So, okay, you know, we know that. But coming away from those conversations, you know, it's about social and economic participation leading to more sustainable communities. That's big. You know, it's about providing people with the services and infrastructure that they need to be able to participate in civic life. It's about connected and empowered communities. It's about leaders valuing civic participation and local decision making. Well, you know, it's a lot. That is a lot. This thing called engagement is kind of doing everything. So how do you even have a conversation about the purpose of engagement when it's trying to do so much? And depending on where you sit in an organisation and the function of your role, it can mean very different things. So I was on my, you know, on my thinking journey. So let's break it down. What have we got? Again, we do know that engagement is about informing decisions. So providing opportunities for the community to contribute to decision-making processes. And we all feel fairly confident about that. Then listening to the people within that organisation, reflecting on our practice in here. The second element that was really core was strengthening relationships. Okay, and often this is forgotten. It's just kind of, it's there. We know that it's important, because if you need to have a relationship to actually have a conversation, you need to have a relationship to break things down and to really listen to communities. So the second element that I felt was really important with engagement was strengthening relationships. So to build new relationships or improve relationships with the community over time. Really important. And at the time, so this is 10 years ago, so a decade's gone by, but 10 years ago, and listening to those people, those officers, it was around building capacity. So to educate the community on a specific theme or issue to increase knowledge or change behaviours. So they were the three elements of the triangle a decade ago. But what's happened is, I think our practice has changed. It's definitely changed. And when we talk about capacity building, there is a hierarchy there. There is a power imbalance there. Someone is building the capacity and someone is having their capacity built. But I think community engagement now has matured so much that we're more confident using processes that are deliberative. We're using co-design, we're using collaboration. And decision makers are acknowledging that communities have the knowledge, the ideas, the skills to contribute. And it's more of a sharing. So we've changed the third element of the engagement triangle. So this is the big reveal. And I think it will make sense to most of you. So sharing knowledge, to share knowledge with the community on a specific theme or issue. Because I feel, especially over the last 3 or so years, where there's been, we're putting much more confidence in deliberative processes. And even if you're not practicing deliberative engagement, that is building confidence in our decision makers that communities do have the skills and knowledge to contribute to these important processes. So from those 3 elements, we have the engagement triangle. Now, I do need to do a shout out to one other person who was involved in creating the engagement triangle. His name is Dr. Crispin Buttress. He was a co-founder of a company called Bang the Table, which is still around now. And I was having a chat to Crispin, he's actually my husband as well, about these 3 elements and how you could take those 3 elements when you boiled all these different types of engagement down, how you could take those 3 elements and provide a tool for groups within organizations to come together and determine the purpose of their engagement. And he straight away said to me, 3 elements, Amy, it's a triangle. Okay, so I've done the shout out now, and I will move on. So I came up with this engagement triangle, and it is a spatial tool. So, you know, we've got 10 segments within the triangle. And what we do on our projects is we use this tool with groups, different groups. So we might have someone from corporate communications, someone from planning, someone from community development, but they're all working on the same project to have a conversation about the purpose of their engagement. And I kid you not, I have watched teams debate the purpose of the engagement for over 5 hours using the engagement triangle with a particular Lord Mayor of a capital city that we know. And the value of the triangle is the conversations to really define the purpose of the engagement. With the engagement triangle, there is a publication that we're launching today with the detail in it. And each of those 10 segments has a different focus. And what it does is it has a primary purpose and a secondary purpose for each. And the middle is where you balance it all up. And very rarely do projects actually sit neatly in the middle of the engagement triangle. So in the middle of the engagement triangle, it is about, you know, on this project at this particular time, it is about informing decisions. It is about strengthening relationships, and it is about sharing knowledge. So Tiff, I'm going to just talk you through some examples so people can see how they could use the engagement triangle. So first of all, say you were doing a master planning project, and a master planning project is a typical funnel, decision-making funnel. You might have multiple stages, different tools at those stages to get to your final master plan. But when you start the engagement, you know, it's much more open. You might start with something like a vision. So it is about informing decisions more than anything else. You've got lots of negotiables on the table as such. But as you move through the engagement process and the stages of your project, you might go from informing decisions to having your draft master plan and moving to your final draft master plan, where it's more about sharing knowledge and strengthening relationships. Okay, so you can sort of see that it can move through the triangle over time. Does that make sense, Tiff?
Oh, I often think it's 1 and 4 at the same time as well. Usually they will lay out, the project team talk about the process of the planning process, which is pretty much set. But then often, as you said, the visioning exercise gives people a lot more opportunity to share what they like about the place, or what's not working, or what can they do more about their suburbs.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, the dot that's in 1 at the moment, it could be sort of between 2 and 5 or something. Depends on your project. Each project is different, but yeah, the sharing knowledge part at the start is very important on many projects to do with sort of that spatial planning. Another one is just the climate change adaptation project. And, you know, these types of projects don't sort of sit within any of the other engagement tools that I know of, because they're really more about community development in many ways. So an example here, at the start of a climate change adaptation project, you might start with strengthening relationships, because you want to know who's who in your community and what they're doing and what their relationships are, what their resources might be, what their barriers to participation are, and also those local community assets. So you might start with strengthening relationships, and then as you move through the adaptation project, it might be more about sharing knowledge when they're actually, you know, changing the way they're doing things, and you might want to celebrate the stories of change within your community. And then just finally, infrastructure delivery. So this is the delivery. So we've moved past the planning, we've got our permits in place, shovels gone in. Infrastructure delivery, there's always a lot of debate where it sits on the triangle, but I figure that it's a lot about relationships, and it's probably quite a lot about sharing knowledge as well. Most of the macro decisions will have been made. They're off the table, not so many big negotiables. There'll be smaller negotiables that might come up through the process that you could bring the community in. But I think when you're actually building infrastructure, it's about relationships, it's about sharing that knowledge. I've just got one more slide, Tiff, before I finish up this presentation. So the engagement triangle enables you to, a few things. So collaboratively identify the purpose of your engagement. And I really want to emphasize collaboratively. When we send out the new publication today, there'll also be a link to the worksheet. So the worksheet is what you use in your teams to identify the purpose. And identifying the purpose is so much about the journey. It's so much about the journey, those really important conversations that you can have with your project teams before you define and articulate the purpose of your engagement. Defining the purpose of your engagement helps you to design up a process that, you know, can manage expectations, manage risks, and really deliver on what you need to deliver on. When there's ambiguity in there, that's when there's can lead to mistrust, and, you know, then relationships will fall apart. Projects can topple over. The engagement triangle enables you to link the purpose of your engagement with the toolkit. There's a toolkit in our new publication as well. So depending on purpose of engagement, there's different types of tools and techniques that you could use. And also map stakeholders. So on any project that you can use the triangle to map your stakeholders, depending on, you know, the focus of that relationship with them and how you want to engage with them for your project. So I'm going to stop sharing now, Tiff.
Thank you, Amy. That's very exciting. I really like the refresh, and I do want to hear from this group about your reflection. My immediate thought was actually, how does that work? That's so complicated, but sounds very ideal. And that's actually what we want to ask this group about, how that works for you. So I will be bringing this Mentimeter code again So I should be sharing this on the screen right now. And if you can use your maybe a mobile device to scan the QR code and tap the heart in the middle, or equally, you can type in menti.com and use the code up on the screen. Thank you for indicating that you're in the room. I'm seeing all these flying hearts coming in. And I will ask the first reflective question and hopefully to hear from your reflection. So reflecting on your role in community engagement, where do you normally, normally sit on the triangle? So there was, remember there was informing decisions, number one, slightly moving lower to the other side would be maybe informed decisions, strengthening relationship, or is it informing decisions and sharing knowledge? If you feel like you're actually doing quite well in balancing all of that, you're actually sitting in number 10. So that's the last in the pile. Or you're not quite sure. Maybe it's 1, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 10. I'll let you rate your role in your community engagement practice. I'm very delighted to see there are a lot of people rating 10, which is sitting in the middle of the triangle, which means a lot of us are actually balancing these different definition of engagement pretty well. And there equally are quite a number of people sitting in number 5. So that's tilting towards sharing knowledge and secondarily informing decisions. Thank you so much for that reflection. I don't know who had rated what, so this is really just your self-assessment. And the next question we want to ask you is, now moving on to the ideal scenario. If you had unlimited time, resources, and money, where would you like to sit on the triangle? We've got people that are going to the ideal scenario to the middle of the triangle. There are also people who actually want to put all these resources into strengthening relationship. A little bit of balance between sharing knowledge and strengthening relationship is coming up. Is it a surprise for everyone that no one actually wants to put all that money into informing decisions? Or is it just my observation that I think it's quite interesting? So that's the ideal scenario that we are trying to work towards. A couple of people are still rating. I might wait for you to choose your ideal scenario and then I'll move on. So my last question to you is, with that ideal scenario in your mind, what would need to happen in your organization for the focus of your engagement to move into the middle? So we're very grateful that a lot of people would like to sit in the middle. What needs to happen in your organization to make that work? Systemic reform, big one. More resources, especially staff time. So acknowledging that you actually need people to do all these things, building relationship, talking to community members. Training is a big one. So hopefully Learning Lab, it's one of the ways, but we can definitely find more ways to train the team. Drop the politics with a question mark. Let go of the power we inherently have. A larger focus on co-design, power dynamics shift, a lot of systemic stuff coming up in this answers. All voices being heard, being understanding and appreciation of the benefits of engagement. Anything you want to share about that, Amy? What are the benefits of authentic engagement? Just a couple of that on top of your mind.
What are the benefits of authentic engagement?
If I'm sitting on this bucket of money, I might think, well, just give me the decision made, that's done. Why do I need to build all this relationship and, making friends with the community? What's it for?
What's it for? It's because you're making decisions or you're governing on behalf of the community, not for some louder voices or some squeaky wheels. Decision makers need to make decisions on behalf of their whole community, and often the corners or the most vulnerable or the hard to reach, they are forgotten. And so authentic engagement is about inclusive engagement and bringing people to the table. In the last 2.5 years, I have seen so many government clients saying, we did an online survey, we've ticked the engagement box. That is not authentic engagement. It's not even engagement. It is engagement tool, but a survey is just one tool, but it needs to be wrapped in a whole lot of different things to strengthen those relationships, to be able to share knowledge, to be able to inform decisions. So authentic engagement is also about engagement that is suitable at that point in time for that particular community, for that particular project. It's not rinse and repeat, which is really important as well.
Thank you for answering that question. I'll keep that reflective board on Menti. While we're doing that, actually, there were a few questions coming in. So first one from Tom, you've asked a very good question about, isn't it more effective to tailor where you locate yourself in the triangle to each particular project? How does that work in real life, Amy? Do we pull out that triangle every single project, every single project meeting? Let's start with the triangle. Does that work?
We do. We actually do that. Yeah, it is very difficult if you work in engagement to say this is, generally where I sit on the triangle. That is quite difficult, and apologies for us asking you all that question. But I just sort of, it's generally speaking. But what we would be recommending is if you work in project teams, that you do bring out the triangle and have a conversation at project mobilization to understand where the various, humans around the table, where they believe the purpose of the engagement sits. So I would be doing it at a project by project level. Then you can break it down even more and look at project stages, because quite often the projects we are working on have multiple phases or stages, and the purpose changes over time.
Thanks, Amy. And thanks, Tom, for that question. Next one is from Rachel about that particular component informing decision. Does that assume the proponent organization makes the decision? In other words, in her experience, does it make sense that informing decisions is to help community members themselves make the decision?
It could be used for either. It could be the proponent organization or the community itself. Yeah, definitely. So, but at the end of the day, there has to be a group, either whether it's the group within the community or a proponent organization that are making a decision or creating the advice.
Thanks for that. I'm seeing a couple of people need to leave. I do want to put in a preempt here that we will be sharing the engagement triangle via email to all of you, and thanks for your time. We do have a couple more minutes to take questions. Feel free to put that in the chat if you're staying with us to 11:45. Tamara had a comment about this is a bloody brilliant triangle. Thank you for that. And there's been so many approaches that have hurt the brain, and having a pathway that can be quickly shared is so important. So thank you so much for that comment. Hopefully this doesn't hurt more of the brain, because it's 3 dimensions. Now you have to think of engagement from different perspectives. I actually want to throw you a question, Amy, if I can. You've earlier mentioned IAP2 spectrum, which is a linear spectrum that says where do you want the level of influence or the involvement of the community members or stakeholders to be sitting at. How does this triangle relate to the IAP2 spectrum? Do we use it in the same time, or how do you envision that?
Yeah, Would we use it at the same time? We could use it at the same time. I think use whatever tools you need to define the purpose of your engagement, okay? Because as we know, engagement means so many different things to so many different people. So we need to be able to define engagement. So you could use them alongside each other. I feel that the spectrum, that inform column, is a little bit problematic because it doesn't pick up on things like knowledge and relationships. And that was why we created the triangle. I created the triangle. But the spectrum is a wonderful tool, globally recognized. And if your project is about making decisions, I would have a look at the spectrum, definitely. But look, you can use them alongside each other. But I think what's important is you use the tools that are right for you and the types of projects that you're working on.
Thanks for that. I've got an interesting question from Tom. Well, probably not a question, but I have a question following that answer. Tom said it feels like the triangle is a good one to actually get it out for project leads to help them do the cultural shift of getting engagement more understood and efficient. My question to you, Amy, is from your experience, what was the struggle for decision makers or leaders to recognize, hey, let's do this differently this time. Let's not just fall into the informing decision bit. What was the barrier for them to, open up that discussion?
What are the barriers? It's normally, well, first of all, the politics and who has the right to make the decision and own the decision. That's always a challenge. I think that a lot of engagement becomes very transactional. We will give you something, we want something back. And that's where there's not that focus on the relationships and the knowledge. But as we know, they are essential to engagement, because you could do the greatest engagement project, but if you don't have relationships at the end of it, what's it worth? But that is coming from an engagement practitioner. Others may see it quite differently. But I think politics, number one, time, resources, confidence also that this thing called engagement actually works. And I think there's been a lot of confidence built, especially in our state of Victoria over the last few years, about different types of practice, which is really wonderful to see. And I've seen people that did not trust this thing called deliberation at all, elected representatives that, really, they were stomping their feet saying, we will not do this, to now flying the deliberative engagement flag. It's almost like we need to pull them in a little bit, because you can't do deliberation on everything. But, I think when we've got some evidence of what great practice is and what authentic practice is, people that are making the decisions can start to drive that behaviour change. But that cultural change within organisations and engagement, it takes 3 years. We know that because we've worked with many organisations on what's going on internally, and it can't just happen overnight.
Thank you for that. Perhaps a little bit more success story that they can hear from the peers would be helpful as well, knowing that how that would change their project and giving them a more positive results from genuine engagement. So I am aware that we are running out of time. Someone actually thank you, Amy and Crispin, for bringing this great tool to this practice, and thank you so much. Also, thank you for those great questions and in your involvement in the Mentimeter to people in this room. Actually, a lot of people mentioned training and resources. Might ask Amy a last question about what's coming up with Learning Lab next. What can we expect from Capire around more training and learning?
So our next Learning Lab, which will be in the first week of July, we'll get a date out to everyone soon, is on evaluating engagement, because as we know, most engagement projects are not evaluated because we're always in a hurry to get to the next thing. So what are some tools and techniques to evaluate your projects that are not, hugely time consuming, they're cost effective, and they actually do evaluate your practice? So that's what we'll be looking at in the next Learning Lab, and that will be in July.
That sounds very exciting, and hopefully that evaluation is not another survey. So with that, I do acknowledge that everyone needs to have lunch right now. If you're in Victoria or in this state, thank you again for joining. We will be sending a link to the engagement triangle via email to everyone who had RSVP to this event. And thanks again for everyone that had joined and your contribution. See you next time in the next Learning Lab. Bye. Thank you. A lot of great words still coming in the chat. I'll officially close this and thank you so much. Bye.